Greetings, fellow rebels, and welcome to the woods. I want to continue our discussion about who to listen to when it comes to spiritual matters. Now, we discussed getting your information about developing spiritual gifts or developing the spirit from people who have been tampered with. And we have discussed the misunderstanding that can happen when you're using your training, your paradigm of things to look at someone else's discipline, someone else's belief system. In the case of a healer, non-Western, and the young woman who wanted to learn his shamanic practices and decided that because people relapsed after he had healed them, that his healing must be coming from a demonic source. Sometimes we have to understand the whole picture before we can make decisions about what is good and what is bad. And understanding that whole picture means looking and asking questions and finding out the reasons for things rather than simply taking them on face value until you can reinterpret them based on your belief system of the childhood that you were trained up in. This is one of the most important things that I could share about spiritual teaching, spiritual learning. Discernment is very, very important. A technique or a discipline that might be very effective for one person or one group of people may be completely wrong for another. It's like anything else. However, there is one attitude, there is one emotion where if you approach spirituality with that emotion, with the desire to learn and grow, you're going to have problems. Skepticism is all right. Asking questions and seeing where things fit in your view of the world, that's fine. But fear, anxiety, and an over-reliance on doubting everything will sideline you. Because your mind, with the doubting, your mind will align your perception with what you're focused on. And if your focus is to doubt, that's what's going to present itself. Every miracle, every impossible thing that you enable or that happens in front of you that verifies the spiritual gifts and spiritual abilities or the presence of spirit, your mind will easily create some form of rationale why it couldn't be true if that's what your focus is. And fear. Fear, again, cuts you off from everything. It's supposed to be a short time pause to evaluate your situation, and then you can call into you what you need. So you pause all incoming, you call in source, and then you have a free field. You have a moment or a split second, depending on how long you're holding that fear, to evaluate the situation where all of your senses are key. They're keen and keyed up and ready to give you a good idea of what you're dealing with. Now, the problem with how we use fear is we use it to cut everything off and then remain cut off from everything, including source. So we can't get a good read. And we were trained to do that. We were trained to be afraid, to live in fear, to nurture that particular, not necessarily full-blown fear of fight or flight, but the lower grade of fear, the social anxiety, the apprehension, the nervousness, all of those kind of, the low grade fear that operates in the background, constantly grinding to keep us separated from source, so we do not have the discernment to find our way out of the matrix that we have been set into. If you introduce fear, you will shut down the spiritual flow. And many people live in a constant state of fear and thus a constant state of shutdown. They wake up with anxiety, they entertain that throughout the day, they use it to drive them into doing all the things that they don't want to do because their life is so full of things that they don't appreciate and don't want to do. And they feel that low grade fear until they go to bed that night. This will cut you off from source. This will cut you off from the wisdom of your spirit. And then all you'll be left with is what you've been trained to believe, or what you've been trained to perceive and experience. There are quite a few people who they set themselves on the path of spiritual growth, and they want to understand it. They want to see in their world more. And so they look into their religion to see the mystic side of it. And they look into their world to see the magic and the beauty and the expressions of source. But then something happens in their life that scares them. They have a brush with death, or they have a big tragedy, or they do something wrong and they feel guilty about it. And then they wonder if that's going to follow them. If at the end of their life, something very, very bad will happen and they'll be crushed in an eternity of torture, because that's what they were told when they were young. They default to what they were trained to believe. Things that often get reinforced over and over again through our stories we tell, the narration of our lives, the narration that comes to us through school, through television, through music, through our association with other humans, the church that we go to every week, reinforcing that over and over. And so we're afraid. And as soon as we're afraid, the default is to go back to what we were trained to believe. It must be true. Otherwise, our elders, our parents, our those who care for us, our teachers, they wouldn't have told us that if it wasn't true. You see, and that can take us away from source. Many of us have been trained to have triggers, to have more internal buttons that when certain events happen, get scared, and we default to what we were told to believe, what we were told to do. Especially when we are up against death, because most belief systems, most religions have very specific ideas on what happens at death. Because it's the great mystery, most of us do not remember what's happened before this life. We don't have the memories of what's happened before now. That transition out of this life, it's very frightening. And the idea that we might go someplace terrible and be there forever it's not a fate that most of us want to risk. It's easier to come back to the fold, come back to what we were told, what's comfortable, what most people believe. That fear will cut you off from source. It will cut you off from the spiritual understanding that you could have if you let go of fear. You don't have to let go of your beliefs, but you do need to let go of fear if you want to see the truth. Something to think about, and welcome to the woods.